Black Labor Exploitation by Cecil John Rhodes and De Beers from 1870. Presently, De Beers Group controls diamond trade in most of the world, but in Africa, they control trade in South Africa and Botswana more directly. Other countries that attempt to sell diamonds through other channels other than the ones controlled by De Beers end up in some kind of civil war, domestic destabilization, namely Sierra Leone, Liberia, the DRC, Angola, and so forth. If they do not control it, they will contribute to the chaos. The wealth and power and influence of De Beers was built on the back of black Africans exploited from the 1870s until now. Even in present-day South Africa, they continued to influence politics and government to keep their empire growing. Rhodes and the creation of De Beers from 1870. The Kimberley Mines were the foundation for racial segregation and black labor exploitation in South Africa. Many mine owners were unhappy with the limited pool of labor and the increase in wages as demand was significantly higher than the market could supply. So in 1872, there were about 1,600 diamond claim holders at Kimberley, but by 1877 there were only about 300, and by 1879 there were only 12 partnerships or private companies that controlled almost 3/4 of the diamond production at Kimberley. This was in part due to the Claim Limitation Law of 1876, which ended the small independent diamond production and created a new era of highly capitalized diamond production. By the 1880s, De Beers had seized control of the Kimberley mine through devious takeovers, buyouts, and consolidations. In March 1888, the De Beers Consolidated Mines Limited was incorporated as a major holding company, and by 1891 they had the monopoly over diamond trade at Kimberley. De Beers was created by Cecil John Rhodes. Rhodes obtained a trust deed which permitted his company to engage in any business enterprise, to annex land in any part of Africa, and to govern foreign territories and maintain armies in those territories when necessary. He appointed life governors who would control De Beers through the duration of their lives. These governors were Alfred Bate, Barney Banato, Frederick Thomas, Phillips, and Stowe. De Beers quickly became one of the most profitable companies in the world. Labor shortages and exploitation. However, there were still labor shortages at Kimberley, so they introduced laws to force more Africans into the mining labor market. In November 1876, white farmers were granted landholding rights in Griqualand West. African populations were moved to crowded areas that would force them to seek employment in the mines. Heart tax and later poll tax was imposed on Africans, which forced many to seek employment on farms and in the mines. However, the demand for labor at Kimberley still outpaced supply until they sought the help of João Albacini, an old Portuguese slave dealer who promised to recruit workers as far as 1,600 kilometers away up to the Mozambican coast. Africans there were promised wages, food, protection, and safety, but once they arrived at Kimberley, they were subjected to deplorable conditions. Work conditions at Kimberley were similar to slavery. In August 1876, the Labor Commission introduced localization, which created closed living quarters for mining laborers. Through localization, 22,000 Africans were forced to live in 7 locations, which limited their interaction with the outside community. After localization, the Labor Commission granted employers the right to reduce wages to 10 shillings per week. Africans were further sidelined through the Diamond Trade Act of 1882. Through this law, anyone found in possession of a diamond was guilty until proven innocent and was to be denied a jury trial. And if convicted by a judge, which happened in more instances, one would be punished with 15 years in prison, a £1,000 fine, and if the perpetrator was African, they would be whipped. Early in prison industrial complex. In spite of these efforts, labor shortages continued at Kimberley until they sought another method: imprisonment and forced labor. In 1882, the average police officer made about 45 arrests, but at Kimberley, they arrested between 114 and 160 people on average. The number of inmates at Kimberley was about 7 times higher than in any part of the country, and once they realized they could exploit prison labor, De Beers Mining Company signed an agreement with the state to establish private prisons where inmates could be used as mine labor. De Beers continued until 1932, which further increased their profitability. In 1889, Africans who were not in prison were housed in closed compounds in the 7 locations established at Kimberley. African laborers were paid a wage but forced to buy food and supplies from the compound store owned by De Beers. Laborers were closely monitored in those compounds and could not leave until their contract had ended. In present-day South Africa, De Beers Consolidated Mines Company controls the primary South African sources of diamonds, including 7 large diamond mounds around the country, and the De Beers operations account for about 94% of the nation's total diamond output. In Botswana, the diamond trading company Botswana DTC Botswana is a 50-50 joint venture partnership between the government of the Republic of Botswana and De Beers Group.